You are not going to want to miss this episode of the Real Estate Pessimist podcast. We talked to April Vogt, and she started getting into real estate when she couldn't afford real estate. That's right. She couldn't afford a single family home. And so you know what she did? She bought a duplex. It's possible. It's crazy. She did this on the wage of a bartender. It did not all go smoothly, but she is winning. She was winning then, she's winning now, and she's going to tell you how she did it. Please join us for the inspirational podcast with April Vogt, the Real Estate Pessimist podcast, where we tell you the good, bad, and the truth about real estate investing.
Welcome to the Real Estate Pessimist podcast. I'm your co-host, Kristi Kandel, a developer, real estate investor, and with my local real estate developer company, a mentor to aspiring developers who are trying to transform overlooked properties into awesome new spaces in their community. And today I'm joined with my co-host, Erik.
Hey, this is Erik Stenbakken, and you were ready with that whole little thing about your background. I'm like, man, mine's not going to sound as smooth. Yeah, I've been investing in real estate since 2010, single family homes and short-term vacation rentals, everywhere from Maui to Tennessee and Colorado in between. And we are here with the Real Estate Pessimist podcast. And I just have to say this, we are the pickle. I'm not going to unpack that. We'll just let you discover what that means later. All right. This is going to be fantastic. So today we're joined by April Vogt, and she has a history, friendship with Kristi. And Kristi, tell us how you met and what meeting her did for your real estate journey.
It turns out beach volleyball is an awesome way to meet people no matter where you're at in the country. I had lived down in Southern California, and a volleyball friend heard I was moving to Tahoe. She said, "You have to meet my friend April. She's into real estate and she's up there and is outdoorsy and plays volleyball." Well, turns out that April is an awesome person. Got me into my first house hack short-term rental awesomeness. And so we're welcoming April to our show today. April, why don't you introduce yourself and maybe give a little bit more background?
Hi, I'm April Vogt. I live in the Tahoe region and I've been here about 15 years. Yeah, like Kristi said, we met through a volleyball friend. Funnily enough, we never played volleyball together, but we did continue to just talk about real estate. I was just beginning my journey when I met Kristi and kind of progressed from there. We got started on Bigger Pockets, loved everything that was involved with that podcast and that platform. And then everything just kind of transitioned from there. We invested in a few properties together, and then we also had our own separate investment. I'm primarily a long-term hold investor in small multifamily, and I also run a successful co-hosting business here in the Lake Tahoe region.
So I want to hear the story about how not playing volleyball after getting introduced. How did you get into real estate? What was that deal, and how'd you get into that?
My first deal was, I guess, an accidental house hack. I think the term was just being coined. And I decided that actually I was saving up money for an around the world trip, now that I'm remembering. So I was saving $20,000 to $25,000 to go around the world. I worked in restaurants at the time. And then I decided 2012 that I wanted to buy a property instead. So I went to a lender. He was great, super mathematical guy, and I really resonate with that. And he told me that I didn't have a chance in heck to purchase a single family home with my stated income. I'll just leave that as it is. I think the statute of limitations may have run out on that. And my only chance was to buy a duplex or a triplex or move off the hill into a different region, which I didn't want to do. For that reason, started looking at duplexes unintentionally at first.
So I want to how is it that you couldn't buy a single family home, but that you could line up for a duplex or a triplex? That just doesn't explain that.
The rule at that point was that you could qualify for the mortgage with 75% of the rental income of the units you weren't going to occupy, as long as the small multifamily was 4 units or less, and everything penciled out.
Awesome. So I'm going to push pause on that and say that right there debunks one of the first things that excuses that they give about real estate. It's like, well, I don't have enough cash to just go out and buy a thing. You just heard April say she did not qualify to go out and buy just one door, but she could qualify to go out and buy 2 or 3 or 4 because of the income that real estate itself generates. And this is the first and most important fallacy to get over if you're considering investing in real estate, is this idea that, well, it's only the rich that can do it. You just heard April say she didn't qualify for the single family, but did for multi because the real estate itself makes the money. That's fantastic. So how, Kristi, did this tie into your journey?
April had turned me on to Bigger Pockets, and it made me start listening to all the different ways that you could leverage real estate. And at that time, I had just bought my first townhome. And I will pick out the big things when I'm renovating, like the tile or the countertops. But when it comes to the little details or furnishing it and doing the decor, that's where my head explodes and I go, no, I can't do this anymore. And thankfully, that is where April is incredibly strong. It was at some point during that overall plan that she helped me pull the pieces together to make it work. I remember we were celebrating, had just finished maybe the staging photos and having a glass of wine. And that's when it really clicked for me. And it got me very curious.
Cool. So before we get into the whole dive into the real estate story that you have, because I cheated a little bit of backgrounder here. I want to hear more about travel, April. And okay, so tell me a little bit about travel, your outdoor stuff, and at least one mouse story.
I forgot a mouse story. So travel has always been a huge part of my life. I've always loved doing it. Since I do work in restaurants for 10 years here in Tahoe. There's always a seasonality, and the tips are pretty good here. I don't work in restaurants any longer, but I was always able to save a whole bunch of extra money. I was paying cheap rent, so I would leave for Central America or Southeast Asia during the off seasons with my saved money, until I started investing in real estate. And then I continued traveling and investing in real estate.
That's
let's see, a mouse story. There's a lot. And this
just one.
This also stems from working in restaurants, but basically we're in the forest here. Our houses and our restaurants and everything are just smack dab in the middle of the forest. So pests are always part of daily life, and mice can get into the smallest places. So I've definitely worked in several mice infested restaurants. I won't name any names. One morning I came to work and I opened up my cash register, and out jumped a mother mouse, and her babies were tucked in one of the little coin slots in the register. And yeah, that began my hate affair with rodents.
I can attest to those mice because I had one story where I woke up and I was getting coffee and there was the sticky traps that catch mice, and my foot perfectly put my toes on the sticky mat, and there was something between my toes and the sticky mat before I had had my coffee. So that was not a very happy morning. And then at that same first townhome, because the walls were so thin and my neighbors had not plugged all their holes to avoid the mice from coming in, you could actually hear them running in the walls and playing.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Now being in the short-term rental industry, I make sure that all my clients have a pest control contract in place before I sign with them.
Yeah, it's a real thing. And that's, I want to circle back to that because you said a couple things that first would seem like, no, that can't be true, is that you were working in the restaurant industry, and you don't have to get super specific, but let me guess, you were not the restaurant owner at this point.
No, I'm not. I have been a bartender for probably 15 to 17 years of my life. And I left bartending around the time COVID started. So it's been about 5 years.
So here's what I wouldn't want our listeners to miss this. She's a bartender and starts buying small multifamilies while she's traveling the world. Okay. So I hear people like, well, I can't buy real estate. I'm only a doctor. Like, I just don't have a real good income. You know what? You need to look in the mirror. Okay. Because April's getting this stuff done. As like Tim Ferriss talks about in the 4-Hour Work Week, you can either be rich or you can live like you're rich. Like, actually just go do the things. And April's doing the things. So this is where she started out. So I want you to tell us just a little bit about where you are right now, what you're doing. Tell us just briefly what co-hosting is. And then I want to circle back to a story that an Instagram post made you remember. So tell us a little bit about where you are now and what you're doing.
Sounds good. Yeah. So I still have the original duplex I started with in 2013. I bought my single family, which is my primary residence, in 2017, and then moved on to several small multifamilies partnerships, some in Northern Nevada, some in North Carolina and Virginia, and then bought a few small vacation rentals along the way. In terms of co-hosting, that is a term that's related to property management. It's not exactly the same as property management because that typically involves licensure in whatever state or jurisdiction you're in. But it does take the role of, preparing short-term rentals for listing on Airbnb, VRBO, direct booking, ensuring everything goes perfectly. Typically, a commission's involved. Sometimes it's a flat fee. And then I also do design work on the side with that company as well.
I want to jump in there. It sounds like you ended up buying through partnerships in other states. And I know your lending is unique in that you tapped into a lot of different ways that you could buy these properties. Can you maybe give a quick high level on some of the different ways through hard money or seller financing or traditional mortgages of how you did that?
Yes. So with some partnerships, we attempted construction loans. They may or may not have worked out very well. Or weren't used in their full capacity, but we ended up okay. And then with some of my newer partnerships, we specifically targeted seller financing. This was around the COVID time. My other business partner and I had both lost our jobs. We had no stated income coming in on the books. So we decided to present ourselves with what we are, real estate investors, show our net worth and what we do with properties, and start making offers on properties in small mountain towns, primarily in North Carolina, with seller finance being the goal.
All right. So I want to take us back to an Instagram post. So what was the deal at hand? Or what did you think was going to happen with this deal? What was the plan?
Okay, so this was actually my original property, the duplex that I no longer lived in. I had some long-term tenants in place. I had expiring short-term rental regulations in our area. So both units were intended to be long-term rentals from this point forward. And I had saved up quite a bit of money in this property's bank account. And one of my tenants gave me his notice. He had been living there for, I think, for 3.5 years, right around the time that the short-term rental restrictions were to be put in place. So I was excited to upgrade the property, do these renovations right, and really make the rental product work for our market and put some extra amenities in. And so I could get those higher rents that I wanted.
Okay, so I want to push pause there and just point this out, is that most people will hear the part where she says, well, I was going to raise rent. And they're like, yeah, that's how landlords roll. They just come in and just raise the rent. But what you might have missed is she was going to add value to the property. She was going to make this property a better property and therefore worth more rent. See, that's how this works. If you're doing it right in real estate, it's not being a slumlord. It's coming in and adding value. And for that added value, you get an added return. All right, so continue with the story. You got this plan to upgrade the properties, and it sounds like the timing was perfect and everything was lining up for just, you were going to bat 1,000. You were not gonna miss the ball.
Everything was great. I had my electrician lined up. I had my framer and drywaller lined up. I had my painter lined up, and I had my plumbing team lined up. The primary amenity that I wanted to add, well, I needed to frame the bathroom in a different way, and I wanted to add washer dryer hookups to both of the sides. This is a really high value add in a small duplex and our market specifically, just so tenants don't have to go to the laundromat. It was really going to be, something that isn't here in South Lake Tahoe in a lot of the smaller apartments. I also had some of those seller finance projects in North Carolina finishing up almost at the exact same time. I would say we were definitely overextended on those, but the money aspect of those was completely separate from this property. So I felt really confident that I could get everything, dialed in the 2 months of vacancy that I was planning for.
Okay, so it's all lined up. Sounds like it's all going to work. And I point out, this is not a small renovation. When you're moving walls and you're talking about putting in plumbing, this is not the same as going to the hardware store and picking out the hottest warm gray. to put on the walls, right? You're like really tearing stuff apart. Okay, so what's the next chapter?
A small fire that started in El Dorado Hills. I didn't look up the mileage, but maybe 40, 50 miles from our town. That's not something that I was really worried about. I was keeping an eye on it, of course, but basically it started growing and growing. During this same time, my tenant was still in place and I still had short-term rentals going with the permit. All of a sudden, the fire was growing exponentially and it was racing towards South Lake Tahoe. It went through a small community and then things started to get a little scary. The next thing I remember was my tenant had moved out and I was thankful because I didn't have to deal with, an evacuation or worry about, a tenant in place. It was actually unbearable to be in our town. You couldn't go outside. The AQI was about 400 to 500 every day. And I was trying to fortify my property where I live by picking up pine needles, but I couldn't breathe, and basically just staying inside with smoke leaking inside into my home.
So how is the construction going at this time?
Construction hadn't started quite yet. It was just demo on my part. I was doing the demo myself to save money, but we got the evacuation orders and I had to leave town.
Okay, so you're getting ready to renovate. Things look like they're coming together, but you got some stress in some other places as well. A little thin financially on that. And now you've got a fire bearing down on you and you've got a vacant place. And so I'm sure all the vacation rentals, people are like, sure, we'll go ahead and stay. We'll pay. Everything's good to go. Is that how that went down? What happens when there's a disaster like that?
When there's a disaster like that, your OTA, which is Airbnb, VRBO, or, yourself, if you're a direct booking, will decide, are they going to enforce force majeure and refund everyone? And, rightfully so, Airbnb, which is our primary OTA, did decide to refund everyone. It wasn't safe to come into our town, nor do you want tourism when there's a pending evacuation order, because that complicates everything. Extra people complicate everything in an evacuation scenario.
So practically, what does that do? If you're a property manager or you own vacation rentals and a fire is bearing down on you, I mean, I'll be honest, I had 2 in the mountains here and we had a fire break out several years ago. And overnight, literally, over one night, we had winds generated in part by the fire close to 100 miles an hour. It was breaking down trees that you could barely get your arms around, that big. It was just blowing them over and fanning the flames. And I remember standing out in front of my house here watching. It looked like Armageddon. The smoke was just coming over, and ash, literally from about 50 miles away, was landing in my driveway, like big chunks of ash. And I didn't know if that was part of my house.
Right.
That's like landing in my driveway because the internet was down, electrical was down, there was no news. It was moving so fast and everything shuts down, like literally everything. Nobody's going in or out. Tourists don't know where to go, right? So they're not even allowed in. And so bookings go to zero. And not only did the bookings go to zero, but all the money, as you would expect, from those bookings goes to zero. I'm sure you're facing this situation. So what happens next?
Well, yeah, I experienced an incredible swing in my projected income because I lost my short-term rental income. And then anything that I stood to gain from any of my co-hosting clients, I also lost that. And I was losing time being able to renovate the property in a timely manner, get it listed up for rent, and do the other side of the duplex. I just couldn't do anything, basically. I felt super stuck. And like I mentioned, I was really overextended on my North Carolina projects. They were eminently set to be refinanced out of their seller finance loans, but that hadn't happened yet. So I did have a lot of personal funds tied up in that, as well as credit card funds.
So you had no stress at all. No wrinkles, no gray hair being added. Yeah, piece of cake.
It wasn't looking good.
So did the fires take out your properties? What happened next with that?
No, so luckily the flames did come right on the edge of the town of South Lake Tahoe and Myers, which is a sister town to us. Super close. It was scary, but I don't believe any buildings in our community were burned, and firefighters did an amazing job. So luckily, I was able to return home safely to start working on my property about a month later.
Okay, nice. But at least at that point, everything went perfectly, right?
Yeah, everything. Well, that wouldn't. I guess your podcast wouldn't be called The Real Estate Pessimist. So
What happened?
I did have to pivot. I had to change my plan. I couldn't do a lot of the framing, electrical upgrades for the whole place like I wanted. I couldn't add in the washer dryer hookups to one unit, but I thought that's okay. I know how to do a lot of the work myself. I'm resourceful. I can do this and I can help my contractors as much as possible. I did do some demo, a lot more demo than I thought. I originally, I think I had hired out the tile work. I did that myself. I helped my electrician in the attic running the wires so that I wouldn't have to pay him for a helper to come along and we could get the job done faster. So I was definitely scrambling, doing everything that I could at the time. And I tend to be kind of good in those situations where I'm like, okay, I'm just in it. I just have to keep moving forward. There's literally no other option.
Okay, so I want you to expand that a little bit because we each had problems. Something happens, right? Whether it's a fire or whether it's a hurricane or whether it's a builder who just quits returning texts and they haven't paid their vendors, but you paid them. Whatever the situation, things happen. Where did you go in your mind? Was it like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to quit. I'm just going to lose. I'm just going to take the cash I can and move to Mexico and it's just all over. How did you get through something like that? Because you just told us you're still in this and you still have the property. What's going through your mind as to how you're going to approach this?
I guess I did have a little bit of extra time because there wasn't much short-term rental income coming or anything to do with the short-term rentals still. People were scared of coming to the area and they were staying away, So at least I had some extra time, but my mentality is always just keep going, like just keep swimming, like Finding Nemo. I can do this. One of my colleagues years ago told me after he hit a water line in his brand new renovated high luxury home that destroyed his new bathroom. He said, "It's okay, everything's fixable," and that really stuck with me. Like everything really is fixable. It seems so overwhelming when you're in it, but I've repeated that to myself many times over the years.
Yeah, it reminds me of Marie Forleo's. She's an author, and her phrase is, "Everything is figure outable."
I love that book.
And this is an important mindset because, as I understand it, you had to do some of the work. You did some tile work yourself. So, quick question: yes or no? Did you do some sort of tile apprenticeship with a professional tile layer?
Not apprenticeship, but I did have a professional tile layer who was a friend of mine teach me when I did the kitchen floor in the same property at 13. So
Okay.
he taught me how to work the tile saw, how to not be scared of it, how to do very simple plans. And then I realized it was kind of like Legos. So it's not something I do all the time, but it's actually pretty enjoyable.
So it's learnable, right? You don't have to go to school for some of this stuff. You have to believe you can do it, try it, and worst case scenario, you take the tile off. That happened to us. We hired a contractor instead of doing it ourselves. We hired a contractor and he put in a Schluter system. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's kind of a waterproof membrane. And so we laid the whole thing out. I went in before he had the tile up and I realized he's a pretty heavy guy. He'd been walking on it's kind of a styrofoam base or the shower pan, and he'd been kind of crushing parts of it. I'm like, maybe that'll fill in with the mud. We can get that to handle it. Well, then I came back the next day and he had all the tile up, and he held the tile in place by sticking a knife under every single piece of tile through the waterproof barrier. Sometimes hiring people isn't the answer. Sometimes you got to do it yourself. But guess what we did? That we didn't have to burn down the house, right? We took down all the tile, scraped it all out, hired somebody else who knew what they were doing, and started over. It wasn't the end of the world. To your point, is like, you can fix it. There's a way to repair it. There's a way out of this. There's a way to get it done. Okay, tell us the next step here. You're going to hire some other contractors to help you get through. How'd that go?
Yeah, so I had planned it all perfectly. I had lined up everyone in order. I had already run construction projects. I knew what part came first and what part came next. So I was leaving walls open for the plumber. And like I said, the whole intention was to add this extra amenity that's going to provide the value to my tenants, provide the value to my property, the washer dryer hookups. So I was leaving walls open. I had contracted one of my known GCs. He had subbed it out to another of his workers who I also trusted. And I was kind of just waiting on them. I looked back at the pictures and I remember I'd marked what I wanted on the valve changes. You had to, tie into the sewer stack to get the exhaust for the washer dryer. And, I kind of just kept waiting on him. So I was doing everything else I could, finish tile, painters coming. And at some point I said, I have to close up these walls because my tenant is coming in. I had secured a tenant at this point, but, it was based on the old bathroom pictures. And very luckily, I did not put washer dryer hookups in the advertisement. Maybe somehow I just knew.
Wait, is this foreshadowing? Where are you taking us here?
So I asked the sub if I could close up the walls. I'm pretty sure he said yes, but maybe he didn't. I closed up the walls, but I did not finish the vanity install. I obviously didn't change out valves myself. I was waiting on the plumber for all of that. And I just left the drywall kind of in place, but not finished. And I don't know if anyone's listening, to drywall is a process. It doesn't take one day to finish drywall. It takes several, or maybe two if you're really fast and you're using quick mud. If the plumber finally came, I think 5-6 days before my tenant was supposed to move in, and it was not the person I had hired. It was subbed out to another person. So this is third down the line, someone I've never met. And he came into my property, basically threw a fit, said, "This isn't what I signed up for," and basically just left. I didn't have his contact information. I only had my other, the sub of the DC that I had originally hired from. And, I was just like, wow, this is not what I expected. And now what do I do? Because this is not a skill set that I possess. I can do very basic plumbing, but I haven't watched enough YouTube videos yet to change out valves and install washer dryer hookups.
Okay, take us through the finish line here.
I came across this Instagram post that I made that originally sparked this conversation with Kristi. And I was like, wow, I kind of forgot how terrible this was. That was the last straw. I was so stressed out with everything that was happening and felt like I had no money and no income coming in. And now the whole intention of this project was kind of like ruined in my mind. But, that lasted not that long. I realized how lucky I am and I can just keep going. I can finish it. I can do everything I wanted to do at the property except for add this extra amenity. So, and I had a tenant coming in, so I really had no choice. I had to close everything up and just move forward without that value add for the property.
So I find it really interesting that you said that you had basically forgotten about this. That this thing at the moment, I bet if I asked you, "Hey, April, how are you going to feel about this?" In it later, you'd probably say, "I'll never forget this. This was so awful. Like this is a defining moment in my life." That's a trending thing, I guess, on TikTok right now. I forget the trend is basically it's like, "Oh, this terrible thing happened to me, and that's what scarred me for life." And what you're telling me is different than that. That this happened. It was real. It was rough. It was difficult. It was stressful, but you didn't actually get drawn back into that until you were asked about some stories and until you found this Instagram story and it brought to like, oh yeah, I want you to speak to how things can feel in the moment. And if you're taking the right action, how that might look in retrospect from a few years.
Yeah. And I mean, it's, all those feelings are valid and it's okay to feel that way. Same Instagram post, I realized a whole bunch of other stuff had happened that really pissed me off too. Like my closet door system came bent, so I couldn't install it and had to go down to, Home Depot, pick up another one. My painter's helper had bent the hinges on the doors when he took them off. So that worked, I had to get him to come back to do that. Typically stuff that I can do on my own. And I was scrambling to do it on myself. My electrician, I've since taught him, but he doesn't know how to cut straight lines and drywall. He'll just kind of tear stuff out And so then I had more drywall repair to do. So it was all this stuff that happened and led me to create that Instagram post. But yeah, I truly did forget about all those things. It really hurt at the time, and especially hurt being treated a certain way by a contractor when I felt vulnerable. But in the end, I definitely kept investing in real estate and kept going. And one thing about me is I love learning. So I did learn about a lot.
That's such a powerful lesson. And you reminded me of all the things that I've forgotten about at different properties. I remember the ditch witch busting the water main at my Tahoe property. Oh, yeah. I remember getting closet doors 3 times from Home Depot. And finally, they were all bent and broken. I just gave up and put in this different curtain system. But yeah, we go through these really tough, challenging, intense moments at the time. And I think we were talking about this last episode, Eric, but are we going to remember this in 6 months, in 5 years, in 10 years, being able to put things in perspective and go, okay, this was one heck of a project and a journey, but you can laugh about it later. And if you stay curious and you keep learning and you just keep swimming, it'll all eventually work itself out. It's when you stop and you give up that you don't get to see the full fruits of your labor and what you've put into things.
Yeah. Real estate has a unique capacity to, over time, forgive its sins, right? It can be a bad, rough thing, but over time, and this is the key here, that usually has a way of stabilizing. When you said you've got tenants coming in, yeah, I remember that. We had a kitchen torn out to the studs, no cabinetry, no sink, no stove, nothing. I had tenants moving in about 5 days. I called every single person I could possibly call, and we got the thing done. We got it done, and we got it all put in there. And I'd kind of forgotten about that stress until you mentioned, like, yeah, I had somebody coming right in. Well, that'll light a fire. Let me tell you what, that is motivation. But I had kind of forgotten the panic of that. I got through it, and now, the property is doing well. We've got great tenants in there. It's appreciated amazingly. But this is the thing to keep in mind here, as if you, as a listener, are going through this and you're like, this is so horrible right now. You know what? That's okay that it's horrible. It's okay that you validate it, right? April said that. It's like, these are real feelings. This is real stuff. We're not saying that it isn't real and that there's some psychological trick you can do just to say, oh, it's actually okay. No, it's possibly that it actually sucks, like really bad. And say that, and that's okay. But we're here saying, it does. There are times when it does suck, but it's figure outable. There's a way you can get through this. And almost always, given time, real estate has a way of leveling out and paying you back for your effort and your blood, sweat, and tears. Anything that you want to share tactically? You mentioned something here about you're working on your telepathy skills and how that's working. As we were talking earlier, how does that come into play when you are doing any kind of work, especially renovation, you're working with other people? Talk to us about that.
So I found out that I don't have my telepathy skills honed in yet. Just overly communicative, clear communication, maybe things you wouldn't expect somebody else to, I wasn't expecting that to happen. And I wasn't expecting that person to treat me in such a way, because that's not how I would treat someone. So when it comes to your money, nobody cares as much as you do. When it comes to your real estate, same thing. That is your money and your investment. So you really just have to be so clear in your communication, lay everything out in black and white. It takes extra time in the planning, but it's going to help you so much in the back end. Avoid such painful moments. They're not all avoidable. They're still going to happen, but at least you have something to fall back on if you're very clear in your communication with all of your subs, because every person that you're working with has 10 other projects that they're working on, and their family and their life and everything else. So you're just one small thing to them.
Yeah, not as important to them as it is to you. If there was a way in a podcast for me to go back and put what she just said in all caps and bold and underline, I would do that. Because everybody comes in, and like in her case with the plumber here, there was person 1 who then communicated things to person 2, who then communicated things to person 3. And by the time they got in there, the story they had in their head and what they were expecting was like, who knows what that was, right? And it isn't for lack of trying, but there's no such thing as over communicating. Say, this is what I'm expecting it to do. This is what winning looks like. Here's when and how much all of these things are. And say, do you understand this? It is amazing how you can try to communicate something to someone and it still gets missed. So it's worth the effort to really communicate there.
Yeah, and you really might think that you did a good job communicating, and you didn't.
Yeah, that's a fact. That's a fact. Well, I appreciate so much you kind of coming on here and being vulnerable and saying, hey, this was a tough time for me, but really in the long run, it's just one of many things that you went through. It was a thorn bush on the hike. That's all it was. It wasn't the whole journey, and that you're moving forward with things. Kristi, you want to wrap it up for us?
One of the takeaways that I think is so important is that through all of this, not only talking to April through my real estate journey, but having a community around yourself of other real estate investors who are doing the same thing is so incredibly helpful and powerful. So that way you go, okay, I'm not in this alone. I might be in my project alone, but everyone else has a similar story. And it kind of makes some of the feeling of hopelessness and the scariness and the fear of, I don't know what's going to happen, because there's at least other people who have been somewhere along that part of the journey with you. So April, thank you so much for joining us today. I loved hearing all your stories and talking to you about real estate. And if you guys like this podcast, go ahead and like and subscribe and leave us some comments and feedback so we can share more stories about the good, the bad, and the truth about real estate investing.
Thank you so much.